Mike Tyson arrived like a force of nature. Young, explosive, seemingly unbeatable. In the ring, he wasn't just winning. He was frightening people into mistakes before the first punch landed. The world didn't simply watch a boxer rise. It watched a myth being manufactured in real time. The unstoppable champion, the ultimate threat, the headline that wrote itself. But here's the hook of this story. The same speed that took him to the top also shortened the distance to the edge. Because fame doesn't wait for you to grow into it. It hits you with money, access, worship, and temptation all at once, while you're still learning who to trust, how to say no, and what control even looks like outside a fight. This episode isn't only about violence as sport. It's about power as a drug, how status changes the brain, changes the room around you, and changes the kind of people who suddenly care about you. When you become the champion, everyone wants a piece. Managers, entourages, opportunists, media, fans. And the more you're treated like a weapon, the easier it becomes to live like consequences are for other people. Tyson's legend made him rich and feared. But it also made him a product, an empire, and a spectacle. And once you're a spectacle, the world doesn't just celebrate your dominance. It waits for the moment you break, because a fall sells in a way victory never can. The early rise was so fast it barely left room for normal adulthood. Training turned into identity. Dominance became expectation. And when your whole value is built on being invincible, everything around you starts reinforcing the same message. Keep going, hit harder, never show doubt. In that environment, discipline can coexist with chaos, because nobody wants to be the person who slows the machine down. Then the hidden side of fame shows up with a familiar pattern. Too much money, too little structure, and a protection system full of holes. The champion attracts people who benefit from the champion staying on, whether that means spending, partying, escalating conflicts, or living at maximum intensity. Boundaries become rare. Contradiction becomes dangerous. If you're trained to dominate, being challenged can feel like disrespect. As the empire grows, the risk grows with it. Public incidents outside the ring begin to matter as much as the fights. And in widely documented public records, Tyson's life became tied to serious legal consequences that changed everything. Not just his career, but how the world read his name. The fame that once worked like armor became a spotlight that never blinked. Because once the public narrative flips, it doesn't flip gently. It turns from champion to controversy, from legend to warning. And when that happens, every action becomes evidence in a global courtroom where people don't wait for nuance. They pick a version of you and stick to it. This is where the psychology gets brutal. A person trained for control can struggle when life stops being controllable. In the ring, rules exist. Outside it, the rules are social, legal, and permanent, and fame distorts how those rules feel. When you've been rewarded for intimidation, it's easy to confuse fear with respect. When you've been treated as exceptional, it's easy to expect exceptions. In Tyson's case, the public record includes conviction and prison time in the early 1990s, events that didn't just interrupt a career, but detonated the myth of the untouchable champion. And the aftermath reveals a truth most icons never prepare for. Even when you return to a different world. The audience doesn't see you the same way. The industry doesn't trust you the same way. And you don't know yourself the same way. The addiction in this story isn't only literal. It's also symbolic. Addiction to adrenaline, to status, to the rush of being the most feared person in the room. When that becomes your identity, calm feels like weakness. Reflection feels like loss. And the moment you try to slow down, you're forced to face what the noise was covering. Meanwhile, fame keeps feeding the spectacle. Every stumble becomes content. Every conflict becomes a clip. The public doesn't just watch the boxer. They watch the human being as if he's still performing, even when the performances collapse. As the years go on, the consequences stack in layers. Legal trouble, financial damage, reputational erosion, relationships strained under the weight of constant scrutiny. This is the part the highlight reels don't show. How a life can keep moving while the foundations quietly crack. And once those foundations crack, the fall doesn't need one dramatic moment. It becomes a pattern. The tragedy is that the world often confuses intensity with strength. Tyson was built as an icon of dominance, so the system around him kept rewarding dominance. until dominance became self-destructive. The protection that should have existed, real mentors, real limits, real accountability, was often replaced by a circle that benefited from chaos or feared confronting it. And then there's shame, the most underrated force in celebrity collapse. Public shame can push people into isolation, impulsive choices, and spirals that feel impossible to exit. Because the world doesn't allow a famous person to rebuild quietly. Every attempt at stability is judged as PR. Every step backward is mocked as weakness. And the result is a trap. To prove you're still powerful, you keep living at the volume that destroys you. Yet this is also where the story becomes human instead of mythical. Because rebuilding doesn't look like a knockout. It looks like survival, learning to live without the aura, without the automatic fear, without the old identity as armor. That's why the later chapter is less about belts and more about what's left when the legend fades. Tyson's arc turns into an attempt to reconstruct a self, facing guilt, facing loss, facing the damage done by choices made under power, pressure, and constant surveillance. The public stays locked in because there are two versions of the same person fighting for space. Monster to some, survivor to others, and fame amplifies both readings. And fame also amplifies the contradiction. People want redemption, but they also want punishment. They want the icon restored, but they also want the downfall replayed. The world consumes the story as entertainment, while the person at the center lives it as consequences, financial, emotional, psychological. This is the hidden cost of becoming a symbol. Symbols don't get to be complicated. Symbols don't get to be tired. Symbols don't get to ask for time. So when the symbol collapses, everyone has an opinion, but very few people have responsibility. And that's the mechanism your channel is built to expose. At the top, nobody trains you for the fall. They train you to win, to dominate, to perform certainty. But life isn't scored by judges, and the hardest opponent is often the one inside. Pride, impulse, addiction to intensity, addiction to being feared. Mike Tyson's story leaves a harsh lesson. Fame doesn't just crown legends. It creates conditions where collapse becomes likely, and then it broadcasts that collapse as if it's part of the show. Power can make boundaries feel optional. Worship can attract enablers. And when identity becomes invincible, admitting fragility can feel impossible until reality forces it. The moral is simple. Applause is not guidance. Fear is not respect. And domination is not the same as stability. If the world keeps rewarding extremes, people with massive influence can end up trapped performing intensity long after it stops being strength. Now I want your take. What do you think breaks icons faster? Lack of structure, the wrong inner circle, or the addiction to status and adrenaline? Drop your answer in the comments. If you want more documentary-style episodes about the hidden mechanics of fame, how legends are built, how they fall, and who profits from the spectacle, subscribe and turn on notifications. Next video, another untouchable hero whose biggest strength became the pressure that nearly erased them.